What's up, guys? It's Taylor with Manual Builders, and we are here for part 4 of the hairdo theory. This is our series that we're doing to kind of enhance your mindset, help you to prepare for the destination that we're trying to get to post-COVID, and constantly try to better yourself. And this week, we have Heath Jones on the podcast. Heath is in the oil field. He also happens to be my brother, so it was easy to get him in to record this thing. Heath, do a little introduction, give them some background, and let them know who we're talking to.
All right, my name's Heath Jones. I'm currently with a company called Mammoet. I'm Vice President of Global Services for Mammoet. I live in Lafayette, Louisiana. I've lived here for a number of years. Work pretty much United States and Mexico is my primary locations that I'm focused on, and do a little bit of traveling globally to keep up with things. And other than that, just grinding the grind out in oil and gas.
Yeah. And right now, that's not necessarily the best industry to be in, at least from what I've heard. Maybe you can give a little insight into that. I know there's very few things that I know about oil and gas. One is that it affects our economy down here pretty heavily. And two is that when I go to the pump, if prices are low, it's probably not a good thing. So maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, we all love great gas prices. You drive up to the pump and it costs you $30 to fill your vehicle up instead of $50. It's a great thing from one aspect of your personal pocketbook, but on the other side of that, globally and regionally and even city-wise, as you drill down in throughout the economy, oil and gas touches everything. So although you see in the lower gas prices on one side of your life, you are very shortly going to see on the other side of your life that you're affected in the pocketbook in a negative direction. So, it's a real uphill battle, and oil and gas is a great industry. And you hear a lot of people that are in it for a long time and that move up kind of through the ranks and move around from company to company. And they'll tell you that when it's great, it's one of the best places to be. And when it's bad, it's one of the worst places to be. So
yeah,
the cyclical lifestyle that's lived in oil and gas will probably continue for years. And I'm sure that the supply and demand issues that we face on a annual basis, if not a monthly basis at some points in time, will continue to be there as well. It's just something we have to balance out, and hopefully we can get to a point where we create project capabilities that make projects equitable that otherwise wouldn't be an oil price point like we have today.
So you said something just now that makes me want to ask this question. So I know you hear a lot about oil and gas from overseas, but we also hear a lot in the Gulf. What exactly does that look like right now with, how the world is?
As far as the overseas versus the Gulf of Mexico?
Yeah. Or offshore drilling versus on land. I don't necessarily know the difference there either.
Yeah, there's, I was on a board a few years back, and one of the questions came up about what are they doing right on land versus what's not being done right offshore. And my focus and background is mainly offshore, but I do have a lot of friends that have been involved in the land business with, some of the major oil companies for a number of years. It's hard to compare that and actually break it down and contrast it because it's not apples to apples. I'll give you an example that's very easy to understand. If you want to send something to West Texas, or Oklahoma, or New Mexico now at this point, or Pennsylvania, you put it on a truck, and within a few hours, for a few $1,000s, you have it there. A couple thousand, maybe 4 or 5. It's hard to get a boat to leave the dock for $4,000 or $5,000. If they do, they're leaving to go from maybe where they loaded to a fuel dock. So that's one issue when you're looking at land. It's just not apples and apples in most areas. Service companies that perform with land, on land work, doing downhole operations, that's another issue. They compete heavily whenever land business is really kicking off. It ends up being a market where you have to go steal people, or they have to go steal people from their competitors, which increases salaries and it becomes flooded. I think the wages become out of line, the pricing for equipment becomes out of line, which in that turn goes back to what I was saying earlier. Projects become uneconomical. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
when you look at the global scale of things, you start really getting into the areas, say Malaysia, for instance, where labor costs are much lower. So you have to be creative on your equipment costs, your personnel costs. If you're going to send certain levels of people in there, that it has to be specific to the specialty that you can designate for that person in order to get the amount of money that it takes to pay that person what their wage is. So it's comparable globally, where for the offshore business, as where in my opinion, it's not very comparable for land versus offshore. It's just not apples to apples.
Right. Okay, so if we're looking at instead of globally, let's talk nationally, right? So, I've lived in South Louisiana all of my life. I lived in Texas very briefly, but both of those places are heavily affected by the oil and gas industry. What about the people that live up north? I know for sure we have at least one person that listens to this from the north side of the United States. How does that affect them up there?
They are affected, especially nowadays. They have oil and gas that's Pennsylvania, Ohio area. Canada's got some great oil and gas territories that they produce in. But the difference is we feel it much faster. Nowadays they do get an effect much quicker than what they did, say 20 or 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Whereas say like right now, for instance, you go out to West Texas and land plays and different areas like that. There's a lot of service companies that come from Louisiana and send their people out there, and they'll put them on rotations. When the business dries up, oil price goes down, business dries up. It's no longer feasible to go and work these wells over and get the oil or the gas out of them because of whatever properties are downhole. Now it creates layoffs. So we're directly affected in a much larger way because there's so many more people here. The concentration is so much more that's focused on that. So, these people have to come back and there's no jobs, that they're coming back to necessarily, because otherwise things would be great. I think I remember from lessons in school that like one job creates maybe either three or five other jobs out in the community. So if you get 100 people laid off, you potentially affect 300 to 500 jobs.
Yeah. Big numbers.
Big numbers. Yep.
So is that, from what I'm hearing right now, is the issue that the wells are dried up, or is the issue right now that there's a flooded market?
No, it's more of a flooded market. Oil is a commodity. So it's if you and I are the only two people that need a gallon of oil, and they only have a half gallon there, well, then you and I we're going after that half gallon because we need a whole gallon. If you and I are the only two people that need a gallon of oil and they have 5 gallons there, well, we're not going to go after it as hard, So it comes down to supply and demand, and unfortunately that supply is there. It's not a problem getting supply. We're very much capable of filling the market with oil, just like is going on now. And hopefully gets corrected. But then it leads into different nations and political stances and, what their perceptions are about other nations that are involved in oil and gas, production. So there's a lot of factors, but it's definitely a commodity, and it's definitely driven by what the supply and demand rates are.
Right. Now, is there anything that the average everyday American that has nothing to do with the oil and gas industry, is there anything that we could be doing to help that industry out, or is that all outside of our hands?
Well, keep filling your gas tanks up. Use a lot. Put your boats in the water and go on. I know it's hard to do, but go on trips and spend time out and about as much as possible. But we as local individuals, we consume it. But what we don't control is what's released into the marketplace. That's done, by countries or OPEC, for instance. And I know recently, I'm sure most people heard on the news that Russia and Saudi are sitting at the table trying to negotiate things, and then all of a sudden one stands up and says, "Hey, look, I don't want to play ball anymore," and the other says, "Okay, well, I'm going to flood the market with 25% more oil a day than what was there the month before." Well, 25% more oil a day immediately hitting the market, where do you use it at? You know, you create a situation where now you have to store it somewhere, or people will buy it at this crazy low price,
Right.
and try and hold it until the price goes up. And you know, I mean, it's called hedging. You know, I mean, they'll hedge it, but it's definitely a cyclical thing that happens, and it becomes really political at times. And you know, countries are fighting to make as much money as they can, and in their mind, what they're doing is I guess right for their country, or you know, otherwise they wouldn't do it. You know, it's hard. It's hard for me to debate if it's right or wrong. I mean, but I think we could all say that it's definitely something that can be viewed as healthy or unhealthy. And if you put more supply out than what the demand requires, then it becomes unhealthy for the world, you know, in a whole, and affects many industries around the world.
Yeah. Now, let me clarify this just so that everybody knows. You're not just somebody that's been in the industry for a long time. You've got some business background too. So you've got a business degree of sorts, right?
Yes. Yeah. MBA in accounting and finance.
Okay. So it's not just the experience of the oil and gas industry. You're speaking from that business mindset too. So that's good to know, listening to all of this stuff. So kind of as we wrap up, if you could just give one more piece for me, I think this is probably going to hit more home a little bit. You know, you've been in oil and gas a long time. You know, our dad's been in oil and gas for his entire life, pretty much. What are some of the things that people can be doing right now, you know, whether they've been laid off or they're scared of being laid off? Like, what's the hope if you still work in oil and gas? What do they look forward to from now?
You know, it's an interesting question you pose there. But so people that are in my position, what I feel we should be looking at, or how do we in the oil and gas business as service companies help create project feasibilities? So, you know, typically you have an engineer that goes to college, and the guy's very smart usually. They get out, they want to put their name on something. You know, they're looking to say, I designed that. You know, I created something, and I got this is my education is paying off, and I did really well, and they can see it. You know, it's no different than a guy building a house or you know, building cars for a living. They can see the fruits of their labor.
Right.
The bigger problem with that is this: when do you reinvent the wheel? And when do you maybe repurpose equipment? Repurposing of equipment can easily reduce costs significantly in oil and gas, you know, if it's possible and where it's possible. So I think the people that have been laid off, and you know, unfortunately, and you know, they're sitting at home, and they're looking towards people like me to say, what do you do with your clients? You know, what are you doing to help the projects be feasible? You know, and that's something that we have to work out between, you know, usually between managers, and make an understanding and engage engineers within other companies to say, you know, with our engineers to say, look, we can do this project and reduce the cost of the project by maybe $3 or $4 million, $10 million, you know, $20 million. It starts mounting up pretty quickly, but we have to drill down to the small things. You know, it's a convenience store type effect, for lack of better terms. If you walk into a convenience store at $5, if you walk in, it's going to be hard to walk out with any money at all. You know, right. I mean, because for one reason or another, your kids want a pack of gum, or they want a Reese cup, or they want a bottle of water, or, you know, maybe you want a bottle of water or energy drink, whatever it is. It's very, very easy to take the $5 away from you. And the smaller things in oil and gas are probably what we could focus on more, and what I am focused on more inside of what I do on a daily basis to help create project feasibility, you know, to make it equitable for an oil and gas company to go out and do the work, versus saying, no, you know what, price of oil is too low. You know, it's not worth our time, and we're not going to make a return within a time frame that our investors will be satisfied with.
Right. Yeah.
I hope that answers the question.
No, I think it did. We do something similar as builders. So instead of ordering, we call it being lean. Instead of ordering a bulk 30 sheets of sheetrock, and then we don't use 5 of them, they get damaged on the job and then they're waste. We calculate exactly what we need, and just order that amount, because it turns out being cheaper to order more material if we need more, rather than all the waste that we have. So it kind of sounds similar, that that's what you're trying to do with reusing equipment and, kind of moving people around.
That's correct. That's exactly right. It's all about drilling down to the small things, and it's very easy in oil and gas. You have in offshore oil and gas, you may have a project where there's a vessel that's offshore on the project, and this vessel may cost $75,000-$80,000 a day, and people walk up and they're like, "Whoa, we got to reduce that cost." The cost on that vessel is pretty high. Insurance is high. It's got personnel all over it. They assume a great amount of liability. You can usually get a vessel company to work with you and bring down their rates a little bit, but that's not where you're going to save the money. You're going to save the money on all of the ancillary components of that project, where companies like we have are going out and doing our specific scope. And then you have a guy next to us who's taking where we drop off and adding on to that, those small things where you can actually repurpose some of the equipment, like you're just talking about, where the big benefit can probably come in. But it takes a mindset, and changing personnel mindset. It's an issue as well. You have to get people to buy into it. And once they buy into it and they see that it works, then you're really, really on a good path to make some significant changes.
Yeah. And I think from this point, whether it's people that have been laid off or they're concerned with being laid off, there's not a ton that can be said for, we know that this is what's going to happen in the future. But at this point, that's kind of what the whole purpose of this podcast is to enhance your mindset and to grow and to be better in this season where it seems like, you don't have anything to do, you're laid off, or you're trying to get back to work. You can always do something to better yourself in that season to make yourself more irreplaceable once you do get back to work. You know what I mean? So I know for sure you went back to school after to get your MBA, right? So there was a gap in there. This could be a time for some people that are, not necessarily working, that could really grow themselves and put themselves in a position to come back even stronger, kind of like you did.
Yeah, definitely. There's always opportunity to grow. And I think it takes a look in the mirror, no matter if you're looking at yourself and what you feel your capabilities are and what you can offer, as well as if it's from a business perspective and operating or, running a business, a local business or a global business. There's a certain amount of look in the mirror and do a self-evaluation of what's going on before you look outside and try and figure out what's going on outside. You have to evaluate, home first. And, I've been fortunate that I've only had to be involved with laying people off twice, I think, in my career, where I was the guy laying them off. And that's one of the hardest things that any manager who really cares about what they're doing can do. It's easy to fire someone because it's not you're firing them, but based off of what they've done, their actions,
right.
what they've chosen. Laying someone off, if you have somebody that's working for you and you got to lay them off, you're probably not enjoying that if you really care about what you're doing. Personnel are always going to be, the best asset that you have. And on the other side of that coin, they're going to be the worst asset you have. So it's a balance. But without a doubt, I think throughout my career, personnel have definitely been one of the highlights, and continue to be one of the highlights. I work with some really good people, so I'm really fortunate.
I think one constant thing we've seen over the last 4 weeks, all the people that we've talked to so far, is that number one, if you're doing something that you're not passionate about, do something else. There's definitely something that you can be passionate about, and you're going to do so much better at it if you choose to do something that you're more passionate about. And the other thing is be passionate about people, so just like you said, if somebody's not doing their job, that's a different conversation. But if it's somebody that you've been with for 30 years that you just can't afford to pay them anymore and you got to let them go, you got to care about people. You got to take care of your people. So that's kind of been the constant here. So we're kind of wrapping up now. Heath, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you coming and talk to us about oil and gas, taking the time to do that. So we are going to wrap up this week. We'll be back next week with part 5 of the hairdo theory, and we will see you then.